Okay, good morning to our participants from Moscow. Good afternoon to those who are joining us from Southeast Asia and other countries in different time zones. Good day to everyone, and we're happy to welcome all of you at our final in this term lecture within the series of online lectures ASEAN Academic Days in MGIMO. And we're very privileged to welcome our next guest lecturer, Tan Sri Mohamed Jawhar Hassan, who is a senior advisor at Asia-Europe Institute, University of Malaya, and board member at the Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies. I'll tell a couple of words about our prominent speaker today, because that's indeed a very interesting occasion to listen to him. Tan Sri began his career in the government, and later on he joined the Institute of Strategic and International Studies of Malaysia as Deputy Director General, and he has a very long and interesting professional career and involvement in different types of international activities. And he has a direct experience with the ASEAN Regional Forum, about which he will be speaking today, because he served as Malaysia's expert and eminent person for the ASEAN Regional Forum for quite a long period. And he majors in issues and problems of human security, trust building, major power relations, global terrorism, and other important issues of today. We have about 40 registered participants, but people are able to follow us on Facebook and YouTube, and we have participants from Russia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and of course MGIMO students and staff. So without much further ado, Tan Sri, let me pass the screen to you for your talk, and then we will follow it with the Q&A session as we usually do it. Thank you. Please, you are welcome, Tan Sri.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Koldunova. Thank you for having me at this MGIMO University event, which by now has become very well known in the region. And Dr. Victor Somsky, it's nice to see you again, and nice to know you are with us this afternoon or your morning. And His Excellency Ambassador Datuk Balachandran, if you are present, thank you very much too for being present at this event. So the topic that we agreed upon is the ASEAN Regional Forum Challenges and Prospects. I will be speaking in my personal capacity, strictly in my personal capacity. I will begin with some introductory remarks, and then I will follow that up with some comments about the importance of the ASEAN Regional Forum, or ARF, and its contributions to the region so far. Next, I will proceed to the challenges that the ARF is facing and the limitations that it has, and finally, the prospects moving forward. So if I may begin with my introductory remarks. Established in 1994, the ASEAN Regional Forum, or the ARF, has some unique characteristics. It is driven, inverted commas, driven by the ASEAN 10, but has a membership of 27 countries from Asia, Australasia, North America, and Europe. Because it describes itself as a forum for dialogue and consultation, its members are not called members, but participants. But I will take some liberties. On occasions, I shall call them members. Although ASEAN is the driver, the forum works on the basis of consensus. This means all have to agree before a substantive decision is made. This in turn means that if one country disagrees or objects strongly, a proposal cannot go through. Effectively, every participant, from Russia to Canada, Sri Lanka to Papua New Guinea, has veto power. In other words, this forum has more veto power than the UN Security Council, or ASEAN, which also works on the principle of consensus. Though the participants are scattered over 4 continents, the focus of the ARF is on security in a smaller space. This space is called the ARF's geographical footprint. The footprint is made up of Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. ASEAN and the other countries in the footprint, therefore, welcome the active participation and contribution of countries outside the footprint as well. I believe this level of inclusivity and accommodation of extra-regional players is unheard of at this scale in any other regional security grouping. ASEAN, for instance, is only for the countries of Southeast Asia. The Pacific Islands Forum, or PIF, is only for the countries of Oceania. The EU is for Europe, but the ARF's participation goes well beyond its geographical footprint. All the members of the ARF participate fully, not only at the level of consultation and decision-making, but also in the security activities and programs of the ARF, such as maritime security and counterterrorism. Like ASEAN, the ARF as an organization welcomes different political ideologies. It excludes none. Its membership reflects a wide variety of political systems. It is not hostile to any country and works with all. Individual members, though, may have their own preferences. Finally, a few words about the ARF's purpose. It is to promote regional peace and security through a three-stage process of confidence building, abbreviation is CBM, preventive diplomacy, and conflict resolution. Given the numerous tensions and conflicts in the region, there is obviously a pressing need for effective conflict management institutions and measures to address them. I shall go on now to say a few words about the importance of the ARF and its contributions. The ARF is of considerable significance for the region and the countries concerned. It provides a valuable security complement to the numerous regional, political, and economic processes at work in the area, although their margins do not fully align. The processes include the East Asia Summit, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the ASEAN +3, and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus brings a defense dimension to cooperation in the region. Together with the ASEAN Regional Forum, the regional arrangements are interlocking building blocks for greater peace and prosperity. The ARF's sustained activity in various fields for the purpose of confidence building has helped bring together countries that are sometimes at odds with one another due to ideological differences, contending strategic interests, perceived threats from each other, territorial disputes, and residual historical animosities. The ARF activities have also helped the participating countries forge link across a variety of security-related establishments in pursuit of a common purpose. Valuable skills and experiences have been exchanged in the process in the international, what are called intersessional support meetings and the intersessional support group. These are actually what we might call working groups of the ASEAN Regional Forum at the official level, each covering different subjects. Now, these contributions of the ARF are truly significant and remarkable for a very diverse region where the countries sometimes do not work together. Let me now proceed to the challenges to the ARF or the limitations of the ARF. Despite considerable activity over a quarter century, the ARF, and I'm speaking in my personal capacity, I can be candid. Incidentally, equal candor is also found in some of the official forums. So despite considerable activity over a period of a quarter century, the ARF has failed to make any headway in fulfilling its central mission of alleviating conflicts and terror and tensions in the region. Not a single conflict or interstate security issue has been addressed by the ARF beyond making the routine remarks on the Korean Peninsula and the South China Sea in the annual chairman's statement. In conflict management theory, confidence building measures mainly refer to targeted CBMs, confidence building measures, devised to address particular conflicts. For instance, specific confidence building measures introduced to manage disputes and tensions in the South China Sea. Specific CBMs for the territorial disputes, say, as an example, between Japan on the one hand and China, South Korea, North Korea on the other. Or a set of CBMs for the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Or even particular CBMs focused on the territorial disputes between Japan and Russia on the northern fringe of the ARF footprint. It refers less, this in confidence building, refers less to general CBMs, broad CBMs embracing all participating countries, whether or not they are in conflict. If they are not in conflict, you don't need CBMs. But those are the general CBMs, the ones that the ARF has been pursuing. And not only has the ARF so far not been able to formulate any conflict-specific or dispute-specific CBM, the general CBMs that it has worked on for more than 2 decades have not been able to prevent the security situation in the ARF footprint region from deteriorating further. Sadly, for the ARF, it is key countries of the forum themselves, located both within and outside the geographical footprint, that are driving the aggravation of the situation. Geopolitical tensions have escalated markedly between the US and its allies on the one hand, and China and Russia on the other. All of them are very important, perhaps the most important members of the ARF. Military expenditure is rising sharply among many ARF participants. The South China Sea is being militarized. States not located in the ARF footprint are deploying warships, including destroyers and aircraft carriers, frequently into the area. The Korean Peninsula, as we know, remains on edge. It has been on edge for 60 years, 70 years. In the face of these mounting challenges, the ARF has been neither seen nor heard. No member has called for the ARF to play a moderating role in any of the tensions or disputes. Perhaps the ARF does not even cross any party's mind when reflecting on the worsening situation or on any of the dispute or conflict. Nobody thinks of the ARF as an option. Some are of the view that the ARF, or rather ASEAN that is responsible for leading the preventive diplomacy process, should accumulate more experience and capability before attending to the so-called easier disputes. So the capability by attending to the easier disputes within ASEAN itself first, before venturing into the other more challenging ones. Some think so. This makes some sense, except that the countries of ASEAN already have 50 years of experience in Southeast Asia, most of it considered successful. ASEAN, consisting of 5 and then 6 members at the time, played a key diplomatic role along with the United Nations and other governments in the resolution of the Vietnam-Cambodia conflict of 1979 to 1989. It was also actively involved in subsequent efforts to stabilize the domestic political situation in Cambodia. Both Vietnam and Cambodia were not members of ASEAN at that time. Individual members of ASEAN, such as Indonesia and Malaysia, have also played successful mediation roles in the conflict between the Philippine government and insurgent movements in southern Philippines. Besides these successful, dedicated, focused CBMs, preventive diplomacy, conflict resolution roles, these are the targeted ones that I mentioned earlier, ASEAN, as a regional institution that is committed to general confidence building and preventive diplomacy among its members, has also performed reasonably well. It is one of the most successful examples of this kind in the world, as evidenced by the peace and close comprehensive cooperation among ASEAN nations. Southeast Asian nations have also resolved many bilateral issues such as border disputes bilaterally or with the help of external parties such as the International Court of Justice. The current domestic crisis in Myanmar is a fresh test for ASEAN. It is a challenge that ASEAN has accepted. How it will be able to perform, we shall see. It is also of note that since its inception, the ARF, sorry, if I can go back, therefore, the view that ASEAN should accumulate more experience and skills before it attempts to lead CBM, PD, conflict resolution efforts for some of the issues in the larger ARF footprint area does not really hold. ASEAN began accumulating extensive experience well before the ARF was formed. It is also of note that since its inception, the ARF has steadily retreated from its original objective of conflict resolution in its three-stage conflict management process. Stage 3, which is after CBM and preventive diplomacy, was once called development of conflict resolution mechanisms. But this was later renamed, watered down to elaborate, and I'm quoting, elaboration of approaches to conflicts. Now, the wording appears to be classic diplomatic temporization. After diligently, can you imagine, after diligently preparing the groundwork of CBM and PD, the final stage, the apex of all this effort is to elaborate approaches to conflicts. Isn't that an anticlimax? This elaboration of approaches is not conflict resolution or attempted approaches, can be done even today. We don't have to wait. It can be done even today by the experts and eminent persons. Professor Koldunova is one of them, or the Council of Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific, or CSCAP, for the ARF's consideration. This elaboration of approaches, we don't have to wait until we build confidence, until there's preventive diplomacy. Equally perplexing, or let me, it should be elaborate, if you want to elaborate approaches, it should be elaborating approaches to conflict resolution, not approaches to conflict. But I must say, as far as this is concerned, the text sometimes varies. Sometimes it's elaboration of approaches to conflicts. Sometimes it's elaboration of conflicts, of approaches to conflict resolution, which is better, which is more like what it should be. So I cannot leave this discussion on the limitations of the ARF without pointing out to one more, well, what appears to be a mistake, and which is rather fundamental to the concept of the ARF. Now, as I said earlier, the geographical footprint of the ASEAN Regional Forum, the area where it applies its CBM, preventive diplomacy, and conflict resolution measures. This area is Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. But how can this be when Southeast Asia is the responsibility of ASEAN and Oceania is the responsibility of the Pacific Islands Forum? The ASEAN Charter and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia of 1976 vest responsibility for promoting peace and managing dispute settlement in Southeast Asia in ASEAN. Similarly, the Aitutaki Declaration on Regional Security Cooperation of 1992 and the Biketawa Declaration of 2000 vest the responsibility for security, conflict management, and crisis response in the Pacific Islands to the members of the PIF, Pacific Islands Forum. So what is left for the ARF's direct responsibility for pursuing CBM, PD, or conflict resolution, therefore, is only the Northeast Asia region, not all the 3 areas of the footprint, only the Northeast Asia region, which has no regional entity directly responsible for it. All this, friends, seems like a rather dismal assessment of the ARF, but it need not be so. Let us look at some of the prospects and what can be done to transform the ARF into a more relevant, meaningful, and productive regional institution. The ARF can realize its full potential and contribute more meaningfully to peace and security in the Asia-Pacific if it is able to consider a 2-pronged approach to move forward. First, after 25 years working in this area, it can consider embarking upon initiatives to address specific tensions or disputes or conflicts in the region, instead of just confining itself to general confidence building measures, which can still continue, of course. Second, the second prong, it can contemplate expanding its mission, which is presently confined to conflict resolution. CBM, PD, conflict resolution is conflict resolution. So which is presently confined to conflict resolution, to embrace as well cooperation in both traditional and non-traditional security issues. Traditional and non-traditional security issues are collectively termed comprehensive security by ASEAN, and not only the ASEAN, by the ARF itself. I'll come to that later. Now let me elaborate a little bit about what perhaps could be considered by the ARF for the first prong, which is to begin addressing specific tensions or disputes or conflicts in the footprint. The ARF, as I said, has been spending so much time on confidence building on the premise that conflict resolution must proceed in 3 stages. You must have 3 stages. You must first begin with conflict building, confidence building, then you must proceed to preventive diplomacy, and then only you do conflict resolution. This is theory. In practice, there is often no time. Everything, especially the first 2 stages, may need to be telescoped when there is a clear and present threat. A crisis need not wait. Some can ignite at any moment. So you cannot go step by step. Although when you are really into it, any mediator, for instance, will have to begin at confidence building. But he has to proceed very quickly to preventive diplomacy and, if possible, to conflict resolution. It is therefore, in my view, not only me, quite a few of our friends' view, time to move on from general confidence building to devising specific CBMs for specific tensions or disputes or conflicts in the region. ASEAN, as well as the other countries in the ARF, already have a reservoir of skills and mixed experiences in the field. The issue really is not experience or skills. The issue is political will. When will it be adjudged that ASEAN and the ARF is finally ready? Who will say it is ready? What are the criteria to say you are ready or you are not ready? There is none. There are none. We are ready when we decide we are. And I think the ARF can decide it is ready to begin. I should not allow people to begin in earnest now. Now it can start, for instance, no, I think this is basic. It's not for instance. It can start by reinforcing its institutional capacity. This is fundamental. It does not have sufficient institutional capacity. It can do this incrementally as the challenges mount, as more and more work comes to on the plate. But it must begin. It must begin seriously. It must begin now. The ARF unit has to be upgraded significantly to perform the added task of conflict monitoring and providing the necessary support for the ARF to execute its conflict management responsibility credibly and effectively. The office of the ASEAN Secretary General has to be upgraded too, because there will be more demands upon him. At the same time, the ARF can task the International Support Group meeting on confidence building measures and preventive diplomacy. This is the working group under ARF that's responsible for confidence building and preventive diplomacy. It can task this working group to explore the specific tensions or disputes or conflicts in the region that the ARF can consider to address. In this regard, the ARF experts and eminent persons and the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific may also be mobilized to help, to assist in identifying these areas. Of course, many considerations will come in, and we can come to that when we discuss, which one should go first and this and that. Now, ASEAN is also, we are always thinking just of ASEAN, whether ASEAN is ready, not ready, whether it's just capacity, this, that. But when the ARF, which is driven, inverted commas, by ASEAN, begins on this journey, looking at specific problems and addressing them, it does not have to rely just on itself. It is free to seek the assistance of other parties when discharging its conflict management responsibilities. It does not have to rely on its own resources only. Depending on the issue being addressed, other ARF members, like Russia, like others, and the United Nations Secretary General may be approached to assist. Reputable and credible non-government peace and mediation centers, which are very well known around the world, such as PACTA, Finland, the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and the Carter Center, can also be invited to play a role if it appears that they are right for that purpose. The resources available to ASEAN and the ARF, therefore, are quite considerable and not limited to ASEAN alone. So when we talk about experiences and expertise, we should consider all these extra institutions that are also available. The experts among the EEPs can also be mobilized. This is what the EEPs are there for. I believe no ARF participant has yet nominated, EEP is a short form for experts and eminent persons. Now, I think so far, all of us, or all of those who are members, I was once a member, all of the members of the EEP are experts. None of them are eminent persons. I'm sorry, I think so. By eminent persons, we mean former prime ministers, former presidents, former foreign secretaries or foreign ministers, well-known, figures in the region who have contributed a lot to peace and security in the region. These are the eminent persons. These are the eminent persons who will open the doors for dialogue between contending parties, etc. So far, not a single country in the ARF has appointed the register. The register, we have to put the names down, but we have not. But this is not a fatal flaw. We can always, and better maybe, because they won't be attending the EEP meetings, former prime ministers and presidents. We can recruit them when the need arises. So as and when we think there is one who is really fit for purpose, or say whatever the conflict or tension or dispute is, then that person can be approached to be as, say, an ARF special envoy to conduct the necessary task. So again, these extensive resources available to the ARF are another reason why the view that ASEAN should first gain more experience with moderating issues at its own backyard is rather inappropriate. As I pointed out earlier, it appears that the ARF will not be directly involved in conflict management efforts in Southeast Asia and Oceania, although they are part of the footprint. This is because ASEAN, like now, it's Myanmar and all that, and the PIF are responsible for their respective areas. But nevertheless, this again need not be a major problem. ASEAN would do well to welcome views, inputs from the other members of the ARF, listen to them, and consider them, even as it conducts its activities within its own area, and the PIF can do the same. So it's quite okay. Now let me proceed to the second prong. The first prong, which we discussed just now, is conflict resolution. The second prong is to expand the ARF mission to include comprehensive security cooperation. In other words, cooperation in traditional and non-traditional security areas of relevance, which the ARF thinks is important. Now, the ARF can make a more meaningful contribution to regional peace and security if its mission is broadened to include, besides management of conflicts, cooperation to address other security challenges and threats in the region. Confining its mission to the narrow goal of conflict resolution, as it has since inception, has resulted in the ARF being viewed as largely unproductive and ineffectual. Comprehensive security cooperation is far from difficult for the ARF. It is not difficult at all. It is already, in fact, doing some of it, except that it is not doing it for the purpose of enhancing security in those areas. It is doing it for the purpose of building confidence among all the players, so that this is the first stage in the three-stage of conflict resolution. So that's the ARF's intersessional support meetings, the ISMs I mentioned, the working groups. They have been working energetically, for instance, already in several important areas. These include non-proliferation and disarmament. They've been working on maritime security, counterterrorism and transnational crime, which incidentally is non-traditional security. On humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, non-traditional security. This is not Cold War, hot war security issues. These are very important security issues all over the world. But the activities that have been conducted by the ARF, as I said, have been for the purpose of enhancing confidence in the context of this three-stage process of CBM, PD, and CR. Therefore, when we do that, judging the ARF by its own measurement, by its own yardstick, it has not proceeded very far. Some of us think these activities should be seen and assessed as efforts, as rather not just for, it can help with CBM, but more importantly, much more importantly, to address specific security threats and challenges in the region, such as nuclear weapons. It is a threat and security problem in itself. Terrorism, maritime security. We do this not just to enhance confidence. We do this to address the problem. Assessed by this standard, the ARF has already made some very noteworthy contributions to regional security. It has not performed fully at all. But if it refuses to consider this second prong, this security cooperation, and wants to stick to conflict resolution, it has not gone anywhere. In fact, it has regressed, and I'll come to that. The ARF can explore other areas of comprehensive security as well to enrich its contribution to regional peace and security. One of the more important areas would be the security effects of climate change and how their effects can be mitigated. Now, as people, traditional, security experts, more involved in, weapons and wars and all that, this climate seems rather soft, but actually it is life and death for quite a few countries now, and it could be life and death for more and more people in the future. It is survival. Survival is security. It is economic prosperity. That is security, economic security. All countries are affected by climate change, but some are affected more seriously than others at present. The Pacific Island nations, for instance, are facing the most devastating effects. As you know, some may disappear in the not too distant future. Another area, of course, obviously, would be pandemics. How they can be controlled, how health facilities and medical supplies can be made more readily available to the less fortunate countries. This is security. People are dying. People are sick. People are losing jobs. COVID-19 has killed and afflicted more people than many major wars and violent conflicts. Almost 3.5 million people have died today. Many more are dying. The numbers will grow. And over 160 million people all over the world have been afflicted. Every economy and community around the globe has been severely affected. So, activities carried out under the second prong can be rich and diverse and very productive. But it will require some changes to the ARF method, to the ARF structure. Activities carried out under the second prong, may need to be overseen by a separate, appropriately named working group, what the ARF called intersectional support group. You cannot have all the ISG on confidence building and preventive diplomacy. Confidence building and preventive diplomacy does not apply to all this. It's completely irrelevant. The three-stage process is completely irrelevant to non-traditional, like to humanitarian disaster. That's not the toolkit. So, in any case, what we will need, we will have to have another working group, another ISM or ISG. The ISG on preventive diplomacy will remain. It does the conflict management part. Then the security cooperation part will have to be done by another ISG, another working group established for that purpose. Unless the ARF decides that the ARF ISG on confidence building and preventive diplomacy can also do security cooperation, in which case you have to rename the ISG and you have to expand its function. Now, interestingly, the clash of footprints between the ARF, ASEAN, and the Pacific Island Forum is not problematic for the second prong. For the first prong, yes. ASEAN is responsible for the Southeast Asia. PIF is responsible for Pacific Islands Forum, not all the rest of the members of ASEAN. But for security cooperation, this is not a problem. ASEAN will grow richer, will become more secure if it works together with the other ARF members to strengthen peace and this non-traditional security in the ASEAN region. Similarly, for the PIF, for instance, for humanitarian disaster relief, ASEAN will welcome support from the more affluent, closer neighbors outside ASEAN. Similarly, for the Pacific Island Forum, there's no such thing as your footprint, my footprint, I am in charge, you in charge, please stay out. Now, for conflict management, that can be a problem because it's very sensitivity. You know, this is an outside power coming in, telling us what to do and this and that, but not for security cooperation. Security cooperation, we enrich each other for mutual security. So this footprint problem is not a problem for security cooperation. And more importantly, which is why they should consider this expanded mission, security cooperation is much less problematic, much less challenging than conflict resolution. Conflict resolution can be a major headache. It can go on for years and years and years. It requires, so much energy, stamina, focus for so long, and still you may not succeed. But for security cooperation, you don't need this. Everyone welcomes it because everyone gains it. And the ARF is much the better for it. Now, some concluding remarks. For the ARF to be able to do this, to expand its mission from conflict management or conflict resolution to also include security cooperation, it has to adjust its mission. Its mission at the present reads, I quote, to be a forum for open dialogue and consultation on regional, political, and security issues, to discuss and reconcile the differing views between ARF participants in order to reduce the risk to security. And it does this through the three-stage process. The adjusted mission could add just a few words, something like, it will be up to the ARF. If it agrees to expand its mission, it is up to the ARF. It is up to the ARF to decide what words it wants to put. So to foster cooperation in the diverse fields of comprehensive security. The concept of comprehensive security is not a new concept, nor is it alien to the ARF. It was expressly recognized by the ARF as far back as in 1995 at the second ministerial meeting in Brunei in August 1995. Paragraph 6.1.3 of the meeting's chairman's statement reads thus, and I quote, the ARF recognizes that the concept of comprehensive security includes not only military aspects, but also political, economic, social, and other issues. Comprehensive security is also mentioned in many other ARF documents. A consequence of the adjusted mission will be that the signature three-stage ARF toolkit of confidence building, preventive diplomacy, and conflict resolution will only apply to conflict resolution activities under the first prong. It is not relevant to the second prong of comprehensive security cooperation. Now, I'd just like to conclude before we move on to Q&A. The ARF has tremendous potential if, moving forward, it addresses both sides of the security coin, namely conflict management and security cooperation. Each complements and reinforces the other. If the ARF continues to make no progress on the narrow objective of conflict resolution, despite already having worked on it for a quarter century, it runs the risk of becoming of little consequence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri, for quite a number of very thoughtful observations and ideas, which I think we can discuss not even today, but also beyond our today's talk, since all of them are relevant and all of them are subject for quite a thorough discussion and thinking over. You know that we have received several questions beforehand, and several questions emerged just as you were presenting. And let me first of all give the screen to Ambassador of Malaysia in Moscow, Dato' Balachandran Tharman, for his question, because it echoes thoughts of several other participants of our today's discussion. Your Excellency, if you can unmute and turn on your screen, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me. Tasri, good afternoon to you in Malaysia. Very nice to see you, sir. My question is on the emerging security framework in the region. The political security framework appears to have evolved with the promotion of the Indo-Pacific framework and the Quad mechanism, and also its possible expansion. So my question to you is, are these mechanisms complementary to the ARF, or do they pose a long-term challenge to the role and objective of the ARF? What are your thoughts, please, sir? Thank you.
I'm sorry, it was a bit soft, the volume. Let me,
if I may,
yes.
Here, Tan Sri, if I may, the question is, which His Excellency poses, is about the Indo-Pacific frameworks and Quad mechanisms. And actually, another participant, Gabriel Andrada from the Philippines, in the pre-submitted questions also posed well, not a similar, but a close consideration, whether the great power competition can somehow influence the IRF. But His Excellency Ambassador Dato' Balachandran Tharman asked about the Indo-Pacific frameworks and the Quad mechanism. Are they complementary to the ASEAN Regional Forum, or they can pose a challenge to the ASEAN Regional Forum? So was it clear enough?
Very, very clear. Excellency, thank you very much for your question. Nice to see you. I was looking for your this. Now, His Excellency was in charge of policy planning in the ministry, so he knows what he's talking about. So now, as far as the Indo-Pacific, if I may, so it is not. There is no consensus yet on what Indo-Pacific means, whose Indo-Pacific we are talking about. And, you know, Japan has an idea, US has an idea. Incidentally, the US, of course, the 7th Fleet is now in charge of the Indo-Pacific area. And quite a few others are also subscribed to the US iteration or brand of the Indo-Pacific. Australia, of course, you know, these are all allies. Now, Indonesia has come out with its own interpretation of what Indo-Pacific means and what it requires. Whereas the US definition of the Indo-Pacific is more in the context of hard security. Hard security. The Indonesian version is more in the context of comprehensive security, something like ASEAN and the ARF if it expands its mission. So, but so far, ASEAN has not accepted it officially. I stand corrected. It has not accepted it officially, and neither has the ARF. So it has not been accepted yet. Now, in the meantime, people are talking about the Indo-Pacific. And the Indo-Pacific, in fact, makes quite a bit of sense, especially for a country like Indonesia, which straddles both oceans. Indian Ocean, and the Pacific. It makes a lot of sense for the US, whose 7th Fleet covers the Indo-Pacific. It makes a lot of sense for people who want to, work in both spheres. But there is one, I think, and this time perhaps we don't have to make a by quotation mistake. The mistake we did for the ARF, and I'm sorry to use the word, I'm not in the ARF now, I'm not in the government, so I'm, Excellency. So, this footprint, these little footprints, clash of footprints between Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania. Southeast Asia is ASEAN. Oceania is PIF. Now, when you go to Indo-Pacific, the Indo portion already has its regional organization. And this is SARC, South Asia Regional Cooperation, with India, Pakistan, etc., unless we are talking just about the oceans. Now, even the oceans, well, those that come within SARC, adjacent to SARC, is SARC's business. So if now, let's say, ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, becomes Indo-Pacific Regional Forum, we have the same problem like in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. It is already covered by them, by SARC. So what is the Indo-Pacific Regional Forum going to do, except in the broader security things? So, but in any case, and the name, incidentally, sorry, fasting month, it's a bit dry. This is the last day, last few hours of fasting, Prof. Koldunova, last few hours. After this, we enjoy this. In fact, we have 3 hours of fasting left. Now, this.
And afterwards, we will congratulate you with the new year.
I get more blessings because I work so hard during fasting. So we have this. The name can be problematic because it's confusing. It's, Indo-Pacific, for some of us, has become tainted by the military anti-China character of the Indo-Pacific appellation, and by the way, Quad. Quad is quite obviously, again, I'm not government. I hope nobody gets, they can get angry with me, it's no problem. Not this Malaysia. Quad is quite clearly directed at China. It may, as usual, diplomatic language, political, they fudge everything, but it's directed at China. And Quad formally is those 4 countries, so-called democracies, but at the same time, they are trying to bring in others. New Zealand, this and that. So that, to me, speaking frankly, is not an agent for peace and security. It is an agent for confrontation. We can argue, or they can argue, the end goal is peace and security. We leave it to them, to each our own. But I think to move from ASEAN Regional Forum to Indo-Pacific Regional Forum, I don't think it will happen, but if it happens, it's all up to the ARF. And they can so decide if they want to. It's a political decision. You're welcome.
Thank you, Tan Sri, and thanks for highlighting the moment which actually troubles many of external observers who are following these developments between Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific. It's that ambitions are rising, potentials, including military potentials, are rising, not only in China, but also that one of India and other players. But there is still no proper institutional framework to mitigate them. And the Quad, which was mentioned by the ambassador and by you, indeed is not an inclusive one, which troubles many of those who seems to be outside of Quad currently. I think that we will get back to this issue once again, but let me now pass the floor to Ms. Yulia Rachinsky, our PhD student who is based in Israel, to pose her question. Yulia, could you please turn on your screen and unmute you and pose the question?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Koldunova, and thank you, Tansri Jawhar, for the elaborative presentation. My question relates to the role of civil society in ASEAN. I mean, mainly the engagement of civil society with ASEAN institutions. And as far as I know, ASEAN Institutes of Strategic and International Studies was one of the first bodies, civil society organizations that successfully cooperated with ASEAN. So I would very appreciate hearing your experience of track 2 diplomacy in this regard, and what are the topics that are usually concerned or addressed by civil society organizations and ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. Yes, I think we have to clarify what we understand, both of us understand by civil society and what we understand by track 2. Track 2 is, in the normal understanding, it's not considered part of civil society. It's non-government, but it's not civil society. Civil society is community groupings working together for a common purpose. Say a community grouping on health, working to alleviate health in a certain area, or community grouping on human rights, committee, which works to promote human rights. Whereas the track 2 is actually non-government organizations working in the field of policy, feeding into policy, national and international policy. So slightly different. So that the track 2 people work very closely. They hope to be relevant and feed into the track 1 government. But they are non-government. If you would call them civil society, we can understand it that way. So I will answer your question. Your question is addressed to track 2 organizations. Now, if we look at track 2 organizations, I would say that the track 2 organization, and your question was track 2 organization in ASEAN, not in ARF. In ASEAN, I would say, speaking frankly again, we have several, but the most important one has been the ASEAN, which you mentioned, ASEAN Institutes of Strategic and International Studies, which is a grouping of the leading institutes in each ASEAN country that works on security matters. They are the top policy relevant institutes in their respective countries. They come together, work together in order to support ASEAN. They work on what they think is important for ASEAN, what they think should be important for ASEAN. So in this regard, I must say, I'm speaking from experience. I may be a bit biased, I hope not. I think others will agree with me. At one time, ASEAN ISIS was very, very active. It really fed into the ASEAN things. It was very, very relevant and productive. Of late, in the last decade or so, it has become slightly less. Now, that doesn't mean it is less, it doesn't do work relevant to ASEAN. It does a lot of work relevant to ASEAN, but maybe not during its heyday. During its heyday, it really was. ASEAN relied quite a bit on ideas and contributions from ASEAN ISIS. Today, they still do. ASEAN, just like ARF, relies on 2 primary track 2 organizations. One is ASEAN ISIS. This is especially within ASEAN, but also for the ARF. 2 is CSCAP. I'm sure you have heard of it, Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific, whose membership is a mirror of the ASEAN Regional Forum. They do work in almost all areas that ASEAN is involved in, that the ARF is involved in, especially when they asked to provide some inputs, then they will sit down, they work on what is requested of them, and they will give their paper, their recommendations to ASEAN or to the ARF. For instance, in the ARF, and including on this thing that we have been talking about, the ARF, what it can do moving forward. Both ASEAN ISIS and CSCAP have been working on this along with the ARF EEPs, experts and eminent persons. All of them have given their views to the ASEAN Regional Forum. So I think they are very relevant. Some of the people that they are highly professional, very skilled academics and former government officials, quite capable. And they know how to work with government. They are comfortable with government. Government is comfortable with them. Government does not consider them as a, nuisance, always criticizing, always pointing out, what is missing and this and that. No, they take it in the proper spirit. It's constructive recommendations for the improvement of peace and security. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, quite expectedly, we received several questions about Myanmar. Tansri, you mentioned that actually Myanmar now is ASEAN's challenge more than ASEAN regional forums. But if you can address this too, one comes from Mohamed Jawhar Hassan from Indonesia, from the Faculty of Administrative Science, Universitas Indonesia. What can ASEAN do to quickly and effectively implement the 5-point consensus on Myanmar crisis moving forward? And another one was coming from Ariella Vijayanti, who is currently with us, I think. Ariella, would you like to unmute yourself and pose your question? Okay, no, we don't have reaction. So Ariella's question is very close to the one from Mohammed, and she asks about the political tensions in Myanmar and their effect on the rest of ASEAN countries. So, Tansri, if you can react on that, please. If it doesn't fit the IRF topic, then we will perfectly understand.
Sorry, it's okay. The second part of the question was what? The political sanctions?
How the political tension in Myanmar affect the rest of ASEAN countries.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Dr. Koldunova. Yes, it's bad for ASEAN. It's bad for our image. It's bad for our credibility. It presents a very difficult problem to ASEAN. Actually, it's easier for ASEAN to work outside its area than to work in Southeast Asia because of all the sensitivities. Now, within here, if I may say, some of the challenges confronting ASEAN with Myanmar. First is this sacred principle. Now, I must say, they always say, particularly Western countries, principle of non-intervention. When ASEAN or ASEAN countries or other countries raise the question of principle of non-intervention, they say, oh, you do not want to, progress. Nowadays, there is no such thing as principle of non-intervention. That's not true. The UN Charter has the principle of non-intervention. It is an international principle, non-intervention. It is related to sovereignty of a government being responsible for its own affairs. Now, for strong nations, powerful nations, they don't like this hindrance. It's a nuisance, this principle of non-intervention. They would like to intervene. But for the weaker nations, it's very difficult for them to intervene, inverted commas, in the bigger nations. And sorry for spending some time on this, because I think it's very important for us to understand why Southeast Asian countries, many other countries, are very sensitive about principle of non-intervention. I'll come to Myanmar later. Right? But it's so important because they have been colonized, they have been occupied, their resources have been taken, and they have been almost defenseless. So they are very sensitive. They're very sensitive when they gain their independence. It's very precious to them, which is why even more than for the other nations of the world. As I said, UN Charter, every member of the UN Charter subscribes to the principle of non-intervention. But in Southeast Asia, and for countries like those in Southeast Asia, it's very, very precious to them. But this can become a hindrance to some extent when it comes to a problem like Myanmar. Now, if in Myanmar, more than 700 people in the last few months, 2-3 months, more than 700 people have been killed, several thousand injured, several thousand detained. If that had not happened, I don't think ASEAN will feel compelled to do something about Myanmar. For instance, this has happened in Thailand. Not once, but many times since Thailand joined ASEAN. They have had coups. And the present government, for instance, is the product of a military coup. But ASEAN was not so, disturbed. But Myanmar, yes. Myanmar, yes, because of the killing. If there had been no killing, if the military had taken over the Tatmadaw, had taken over the government, had just done away with the NLD, National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi's this, ASEAN would be very, concerned, like the rest of the world, or Western world especially, but I don't think it will feel compelled to move in. But now it feels compelled. It must do something. And everybody says what you are doing. You are in charge of Southeast Asia. What aren't you doing? And if we say, for instance, this principle of non-intervention, internal affairs, etc., it's not good enough because people are dying. So this is what prevailed upon ASEAN to come out to do something. Now, again, ASEAN, because it works on the principle of consensus, it needs the agreement of everyone. It had a problem because there are countries within ASEAN which do not want to act too firmly or purposefully on Myanmar because some of them, this could be a precedent. They don't want ASEAN to come into their area. Now, incidentally, there's a lot of many, especially younger generation, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, we talk democracy, democracy, democracy. ASEAN Charter says democracy, democracy, which is very true. And we must move in that direction. But there is a reality check as well. The majority of ASEAN, 6 out of 10 countries, are not democracies. And they are not moving in the direction of democracy. So sometimes these are the realities we have to contend with. Principle of non-intervention, the fact that there are non-democracies. So for instance, the Thai PM did not attend the meeting in Jakarta. So these are some of the challenges that ASEAN faces when it has to confront a problem in its own backyard. But it has to do something, and it came out with the 5 points, which in Jakarta, we all know. For the information of the others, if we have some time, I very briefly mention. First, immediate cessation of violence on the part of all parties, and all parties to exercise the utmost restraint. I think this, so far, to a substantial extent, has been done. Not because ASEAN said it, but internally. There is less, but still going on, but not as badly as before. It could turn worse again. Second, the 5-point consensus was future, and mind you, it is carefully worded diplomatically, future commencement of dialogue between all parties. Third, appointment of special envoy to facilitate mediation of dialogue. Fourth, provision of humanitarian assistance. Fifth is visit of the special envoy. So far, reaction from Myanmar has been when the situation is stable. So you are welcome, your special envoy, etc., but after the situation is stable. And how long that will take, we do not know. We have to work on it. This is what diplomats like Dato Balachandran are there for. To make the impossible possible. So that's one of the challenges it faces. The other one, so the present, the Tatmadaw, who are in control now, say you can come, but you come later, not now. You come when we are ready. And Tatmadaw has given 1 year emergency. Now, I must also point out, for many of us, we are shocked by what happened in Myanmar. But I am too. But we must bear in mind Myanmar history. Myanmar history, it is what, 60 odd years old, 70, 71, 72 years old, 50 of those years under military rule. 2/3 of the time, independent Myanmar has been under military rule. It has not been under military rule, it has been under democratic rule only for 13 years. The military thinks it has a, God-given, divine, I'm sorry to use this term, responsibility to be in charge of Myanmar. And to some extent, they feel they are right. They have a right to do it because Myanmar, unlike all the other countries in Southeast Asia, which have more or less pacified the rebellions, the resistance movements within their countries, they are largely peaceful, including in the Philippines or Thailand now, except for the south a little bit. Myanmar, all this while, because when it gained independence, it was declared a unitary state. Unitary state, central. So all the ethnic groups, there are over 100 ethnic groups in Myanmar, all of them had to bow down to Yangon at that time, now the new capital. And some of them, of course, the Myanmar government has successfully managed to bring in peaceful, most of them, but there are some. And those members are still a problem now. So for ASEAN, it will have to face all these problems, political, psychological, etc. And Myanmar is in charge. I mean, the military there is in charge. They call the shots. You can come, but you come when we tell you to do. And there are other things. For ASEAN, it must appoint the special envoy. So far, I think 2 weeks now, I don't know what's happening, behind closed doors, maybe they already have a name. If they have, good, but the special envoy, we have to appoint. And the other one, humanitarian assistance. We have the Center for Humanitarian Assistance. We have to work out where the humanitarian assistance is going to come from, how it is going to be delivered, which are the parties that ASEAN, this Center for Humanitarian Support, will have to deal with. How is the thing going to be distributed? So and most difficult of all is who can this special envoy engage with in Myanmar? The government, I would say government, some don't like it. The Tatmadaw, the ruling group in Myanmar, they will not want the special envoy to talk to the others. The other side, national unity, they call themselves something like national unity. They don't want ASEAN to engage with the Tatmadaw, the military, because they think the military is illegitimate, do not represent the people. Now, the special envoy has to work through all this. So I think the challenges are there. There will be no speedy progress, but this does not mean ASEAN failed. Now, that is very important. This is a problem that ASEAN, any country will face, especially when you have principle of non-intervention so strongly held, etc. And final point, ASEAN is not supranational. ASEAN cannot dictate. So sometimes, especially the West, they say, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Can't you do this? Can't you do that? Impose sanctions, this, that, etc. We are not supranational. In ASEAN, each country retains control. In fact, ASEAN SecGen has very little power. And this is one problem when you want to do conflict resolution outside Southeast Asia too. You want to go to Korea, and this and that, it's going to be a problem. The chairmanship circulates. Today it's Brunei, well, it can be Indonesia, it can be Malaysia, it can be Cambodia, it can be Laos, it can be Myanmar, the chair of ASEAN. So we have to grapple with all these things, but we are not supranational. Unlike EU, all the countries have ceded quite a bit of their authority, of their power to the central, you can call it government, EU government. They have a parliament. They elect the parliament. We have no parliament, no ASEAN parliament. We have not ceded any of our sovereign powers to the ASEAN sector or the ASEAN entity at the center. No, all of us are, we keep this. So when we come to Myanmar, we cannot order, inverted commas, Myanmar to do this or to do that. We have to persuade, we have to talk to them, etc. Sorry, I stopped there.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri, for your very frank and thoughtful observations on Myanmar, which is indeed a challenge, a very serious situation, and you perfectly highlighted that aspects of the problem which aggravate it even further and make it different from other cases. I think that we just have to wait and see, but it probably will kick off important institutional changes in ASEAN. And we sincerely wish all the success to the ASEAN envoy, he or she, whoever it will be, because if this mission succeeds, it will mean that ASEAN way will persist, and actually that kind of inclusivity which ASEAN fostered throughout its process of development will keep it meaningful aspects. We are running out of time. One question remains uncovered, but you partly touched upon that aspect of regional situation, which refers to the pandemic, to the challenges to the economic security. And let me share just several final observations which I had while listening to you and to the overall discussion, Victor, and Dr. Victor will follow. I think that an inclusive talk is often underscored. And it's more visible now than ever that when people, but even just not people, states stop to communicate properly, and how many problems it entails. We see it in the cases of Sino-American talks in Alaska, which failed. We see it in case of Russia-European Union talks, which are problematic. And all this, once again, should reaffirm us that an inclusive platform like ASEAN Regional Forum indeed important, even if representatives of these countries just meet regularly and could exchange of opinions. That's not just a mere talk shop. That's the process of normal well-being of countries in an international community. Secondly, I think that ASEAN Regional Forum is like the international law. Of course, it has flaws, but it's better to have it than to have nothing of that kind. Conflict resolution, I think, is possible when international law is lying at the core of this conflict resolution. And here we come to the notion of security regimes. For example, security regimes, they do not need value or ideological convergence. They just need the rules of the game. And there are many issues which now emerge, for example, like information security, biological security issues, challenge of the pandemic, about which Anna Gaspar from the Philippines also asked in the questions, pre-submitted questions. And we need indeed health protocols, new rules of communication in these new spheres of international relations. All this, I think, highlights that idea of comprehensive security, and also a very good book by Rodolfo Severino comes to my mind, which he wrote about ASEAN Regional Forum and the areas it can expand its activities to. And finally, and I will stop and give the floor to Dr. Victor, I think that ASEAN success partly lies in the intention to get integrated. So this inspires me in thinking that probably ASEAN will be able to manage the Myanmar crisis as well. But in ASEAN Regional Forum, as you rightly pointed out, there are 27 members who are not necessarily willing to get closer integrated. So here we need a totally different understanding how we can manage this kind of cooperation. But nobody, I think, would object that this cooperation is impossible. So, Dr. Victor, please, your comment.
Thank you very much. taking into consideration the time we're meeting at, let me say, Selamat Hari Raya, dan mohon zahir batin, which is a typical Eid al-Fitr greeting in the Malay world. Tan Sri, you certainly do not need my compliments, but I can't help but saying that this was an analytical tour de force. Thank you very much for a whole number of messages that you have sent to us today, and let me just share some very quick impressions on several subjects that you raised. The subject of IRF relevance or irrelevance, or you may put it in another form, anachronism. You can be anachronistic in at least two ways, being ahead of time and being behind the times. Paradoxically, IRF was very, very much ahead of its time when in 1994 it came in a composition in which it came. Actually, you can call it Indo-Pacific, taking into consideration that India and all the other SAARC members were there from almost the very start, as well as, of course, Northeast Asian participants and Oceania, not to speak of ASEAN itself. So from that point of view, again, ASEAN Regional Forum is something that emerged well before the demand for something like that happened, and sadly this banner is now taken over by another force. I fully subscribe to your assessments of what Quad is all about, and I may only say that if developments continue the way they are continuing, Quad will relieve its anachronism by creating something like Seattle in this part of the world. We know what this organization was about and how it ended, and with this in mind, I think we can come to a very definite conclusion about what can a recovery, a new attempt to create something like that in the region lead to. Myanmar, I fully agree with what you have said about the ASEAN's options and possibilities of doing something constructive on this front, and how painful the choices are. But let me also say that what makes it especially difficult for ASEAN to react to challenges like this is that it happens at the time when many challenges are overlapping and coming at the same time. US-China is eclipsing everything else that's going on in the region now, including ASEAN, sadly. COVID-19 has created a situation in which export-oriented development model becomes obsolete, because free trade is basically dead, or very, very close to it, with all the consequences for all the integration initiatives which have been, which we have known so far in the region, including maybe even RCEP. Who knows? Because it still continues to operate on the free trade assumptions and the idea that this is the way of the future. And then, of course, we have the whole Indo-Pacific saga and Quad, which has already started the operation of hijacking some of the ASEAN members and bringing them into their own orbit rather than cooperating with ASEAN. And here you have Myanmar, which has been the headache of ASEAN for the last quarter of a century, and the fact that this headache is re-emerging approximately every 5 years is an interesting indication of the fact that you have some undercurrents beyond all that, including the importance of China as Myanmar's partner. So all this combined, I think it brings us to a point when we may say that Indo-Pacific is a very problematic project, but unfortunately Asia-Pacific is there no more. It has been very, very badly shattered by the developments of the last 5 or 6 years, and I think what we confront here, when I say we, I mean all the participants, including Russia, in what we have known as the Asia-Pacific integration process, is the need to reconfigure the whole integration concept in that part of the world, and to start thinking about inventing something new that will not be Indo-Pacific in accordance with American precipice, but which will take us beyond the Asia-Pacific mind frames which we had so far. So sorry for maybe a comment which is too extensive, but there are many more points which you raised today, which I think deserve further discussion. And thank you very much for being with us here today.
We know that just several hours stay between you and the end of fasting, and that's why we are especially thankful for your talk and for you to have that strength to earn more blessing at the end of this fasting. Please receive our very sincere gratefulness, and I think that all the participants from the Zoom account, they are also thanking you for your talk today. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Koldunova. Thank you very much, Dr. Victor. So nice to see you. I lost my hair, but you have you have it. So thank you. It's very nice friends, from the past. Yeah, good to know. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share these thoughts about it. It's not a very exciting subject, so but we try to make it a little bit more interesting. So thank you again. Thank you very much.
I think you made it interesting, and you provoked many other thoughts in the audience and in us. And here we have to conclude the series of our 6 lectures which we had this term, but more I hope will come. And Tansri, that will be a privilege to have you in our future events as well. Thank you, and we are finishing here at this moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Koldunova. Thank you, Dr. Victor. Thank you.